This is an exclusive conversation with the Deputy Foreign Minister of Norway, Andreas Kravik. Minister, sir, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today. Let's begin with the bilateral between India and Norway. We're looking at an EFTA. Is that going to come through, because this is an election year for India and we'll soon have the code of conduct? So are you hopeful, or will we have to wait for the next government?
We are very hopeful that we will be concluding the free trade agreement with India in the very near future. So of course, there are certain things that need to be polished, but I think that we're in a very, very good process, and we are, again, hopeful to conclude the agreement very soon.
Are there niggling areas that could take a little longer, or are we looking at a more positive outcome sooner than later?
Well, I think, again, that this is something that will be concluded sooner rather than later. Of course, you have had various issues that have been, difficult to resolve. You have various economies that will have to look at these things and have to overcome some obstacles, of course, as in any type of negotiation. But we're hopeful and very comfortable in saying that this would now be concluded within a few days, I think.
You've just returned from a travel to Doha. Conversations in Afghanistan are important, not just for the European countries, but particularly for India. What was the conversation on Afghanistan? We are still looking at major curbs for women in the country. How's Norway really pushing for women's freedom?
So, we have a multifaceted approach to Afghanistan and in fact to authorities. So on the one hand, we have been crystal clear in our commitment to human rights, and especially women's rights and the rights of girls. And some of the policies that have been enacted by the de facto authorities or the Taliban have been regressive, been very counterproductive, and we've been very clear about that. On the other hand, we also think it's important for us to engage the Taliban, because otherwise we're not going to be successful. So we have communicated to them. They didn't show up at the meeting now in Qatar, and that was very unfortunate, but we have had in our bilateral relations with them, of course, we are in informal contact with them. We've said that this is an opportunity for them. The various states are committed, us being one of them. The UN is committed. The Secretary General Antonio Guterres was in Qatar for the entire meeting, and there's a clear path now towards a better relations between the international community and the Taliban, but that requires that they are willing to accommodate to the concerns we have. They need to respect human rights, they need to respect the rights of women and girls, and they need to open up their economy, and they need to be more accommodative again to the priorities and concerns of the international community, and also respect the obligations of Afghanistan.
You're here in Delhi at a time when we are seeing so many conflicts, so shifting focus to another very important one, which is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We've seen 2 new members in the NATO right now. There is ratification that's required, but 2 new members nonetheless. How do you see NATO play a role in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, one, and former US President Trump's stance on NATO itself?
Well, to begin with the conflict, the war, we have been crystal clear since the start that what Russia did was a violation, or is still doing, is a violation of international law. It's a violation of the UN Charter, and it infringes on fundamental principles such as the right to territorial integrity, the right to national sovereignty, and of course Ukraine is fighting for its existence, and that's something that we support, and we've been adamant in our support. We have a financial commitment to Ukraine, we have a military commitment to Ukraine in the form of supplying weaponry and so forth. That's of course defensive by nature, and that's exactly what the Ukraine is doing. They're defending themselves. And NATO is critical in that effort. The NATO alliance is unified in its approach towards Russia, where Russia has violated international law, and that's not something that we can tolerate. But it's important for us to underline that NATO is a defensive alliance. It has nothing against Russia, but the problem here is that Russia has violated the sovereignty of an independent state in Europe, Ukraine.
What about Trump's stance on NATO, and do you think, should Trump return to power, that the strength of NATO will certainly dissipate?
We're comfortable in this infrastructure, in the NATO infrastructure remaining intact also under a potential US or Trump presidency. There is a shared collective support within the alliance for this collective defense agreement that NATO is emblematic of, and that's something that we think will be continued by any U.S. president. So, of course, we've seen and heard some of the statements by engage in real policies, then the U.S. will be as committed as they currently are when it comes to defending NATO and defending the principles that underpin
And finally, there are a lot of challenges that the world is looking at today. Even in the dialogues over here at this forum, conversations on the Red Sea challenges, commercial shipping lanes being affected because of the Israel-Hamas war has really dominated the conversation over here. For Norway, how important is it to ensure security of the maritime corridors, shipping lanes, connectivity, commercial ships, but particularly the Israel-Hamas war, where we also have another section questioning the deaths of civilians in Gaza?
Well, when it comes to the Red Sea and the attacks that we've seen against civilian vessels, that's completely intolerable and something that we've been condemning in the strongest terms. Of course, we've also had Norwegian vessels attacked. 2 vessels have been physically attacked, and we've had 1 vessel that just barely escaped an attack. And we have communicated and condemned this directly to the Houthis and said this is not something that is tolerable and something that has to be condemned by us, by the international community. And we have dedicated personnel and also resources to various operations that are active in terms of combating and at least preventing some of these things from attacks from occurring. But of course, this is, as you alluded to, this is tied to the conflict on Gaza, and we have been very clear about our calling for a ceasefire. There has to be a ceasefire now in the Gaza Strip. What's happening to the civilians there is just not something that is unconscionable, something that cannot stand. And we're hopeful that we can get a ceasefire in the not too distant future, in which case we're also hoping that the Houthis will understand that they need to back down, they need to de-escalate, so that we can get the conversation going towards more humanitarian assistance, more better conversations, and we need to try to secure a 2-state solution that provides sovereignty and independence to a Palestinian state, but also, of course, security to Israel.
Mr. Trout, thank you so much for speaking here with me today.
Much appreciated.